Friday series, High-Level Dialogue. Today, we will discuss nature-based solutions as a force for a green and resilient recovery. Let me introduce myself. I am Manuel Pulgar-Vidal, Climate and Energy Global Practice Leader with WWF International, used to be Minister of the Environment of Peru and President of COP20. And today that we are celebrating the World Day of the Environment, so happy day to you all, which motto it is, it's time for nature. We are going to discuss that. We are going to discuss about nature and how much nature must be part of any recovery plan after this pandemic crisis. But before of that, let me share with you some housekeeping rules. First, keep safe, follow the rules of your government, stay at home if that is the rule, clean your hands, and all what we do need to follow to be really safe. I hope to you all and to all your families to keep safe and to be healthy and expecting for a new future of the world. After that, the second, it is please change your name in your Zoom, just to have our technical support identifying you well if you have any questions. And that moves me to the third. Please use the Q&A in the bottom of your screen to make any question, identify well yourself, and please tell us if you are directing your question to any of our panelists. And that's it. With that, let's start with our discussion for today. Today, we have a fantastic panel. But before of that, we will have opening remarks by two important people. The first one, José Ángel Gurría, Secretary General of the OECD, our partner with WWF in this Friday series, and following by Ryder, Director General of the International Labour Organization, ILO. So José Ángel is going to be by video, and after that, Guy is going to give us some opening remarks. So please, let's go with the video.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the second World Wildlife Fund OECD high-level dialogue, focusing on the importance of nature-based solutions and how they can contribute to a green and resilient recovery. We are in the midst of an unprecedented global health emergency with far-reaching economic and social consequences. The immense human tragedy of the COVID-19 pandemic has exposed our lack of preparedness for systemic challenges. The world remains at the grip of worsening climate change and severe biodiversity losses. Without significant changes to our economic systems, the social and economic impacts of these crises will unquestionably eclipse those of COVID-19. As governments work towards an economic recovery, the priority must be to reduce the likelihood of future shocks and increase society's resilience, while at the same time focusing on the needs of the most vulnerable. We must learn from this unforeseen crisis to better ourselves, to improve our responses. Crucially, we must build economic systems that value nature as a central source of human well-being and environmental health in the post-COVID-19 world. Safeguarding biodiversity can help reduce future health risks and make our societies more resilient. The 2019 OECD report on, quote, biodiversity finance and the economic and business case for action, that was the title of the work, stresses that biodiversity is a foundation of our health, our well-being, and the economy. For example, globally, the total economic value of ecosystem services is estimated to be between 125 and 140 trillion US dollars per year. Trillion. In addition, marine and terrestrial ecosystems sequester, in gross terms, the equivalent of 60% of human carbon dioxide emissions. So the international community has increasingly recognized the value of nature in strengthening our societies and our economy's resilience. So-called nature-based solutions aim to maximize synergies between ecosystem conservation and human well-being. Taking the example of mangroves, it is estimated that without the mangroves in the world, 15 million more people across the world would suffer from coastal flooding annually. Mangroves play a particularly valuable role in lower income countries, in which a large number of vulnerable communities are concentrated along coastlines that are prone to flooding. Now, in addition to this advantage of flood protection, mangroves provide important habitat and shelter for a wide range of species. It also serves as a carbon sink, a powerful carbon sink. And they increase harvestable marine resources upon which communities, especially women, depend. So despite their well-recognized role and potential, the application of nature-based solutions continues to be limited in numbers, but also in scale. Three actions are critical to turning this trend around. First, we need to recognize that investing in nature supports health, supports quality of life, creates jobs. In our contributions to the French G7 presidency last year, 2019, we have shown that each dollar invested in ecosystem restoration can produce multiple dollars of benefits. Second, we need to promote nature-based solutions as part of national and international policy frameworks. This includes placing them front and center in countries' climate and biodiversity strategies, and in the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. And third, we need to design an enabling environment, both financially, but also from the regulatory point of view, that promotes the use of nature-based solutions among public and private decision makers. So, dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, let me conclude with the words of the American writer and environmental activist Wendell Berry, who once famously said, and I quote, "The earth is what we all have in common." Very simple, but so very true. Our planet is our life. Our planet is our health. Our planet is our future. The solutions to address the COVID-19 crisis and our plans to relaunch our economies must take this crucial fact into consideration. Our solutions to the health and economic crises must carry the elements of our solutions to the environmental crisis. Nature-based solutions is one of the elements, one of the approaches. Let's make the most out of nature-based solutions as a force for greener and more resilient economies. Remember, we need nature more than it needs us. I wish you rich and fruitful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much to José Ángel Gurría, Secretary General of OECD. So let me now give the floor to Guy Ryder, Director General of the ILO. So please, Guy, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Manuel, and thanks both to the WWF and the OECD for including me in this important dialogue on World Environment Day. It couldn't be better timed, could it? What I really want to say in these few opening remarks is that our current circumstances, I think, provide us with ample reasons to reflect anew on the question of nature-based solutions and the future direction of the world of work in particular from an ILO perspective. You know, if for no other reason, I think the advent of this pandemic and its likely origins is already reason in itself for us to reflect on the relationship and interaction of nature and human beings. There are very fundamental health issues involved in this, but I want to perhaps focus on the economic and social circumstances that we find ourselves in right now and where we might move on from them. Now, I'm not going to either depress or bore you with a lengthy explanation or presentation of the dire economic and social circumstances of the moment. Suffice to say that in the second quarter of this year, by comparison with the pre-pandemic end of 2019 quarter, we estimate that the pandemic has led to the destruction of the equivalent of 305 million full-time jobs. We base this on the fact that actual work being undertaken has been reduced by 10.7% around the world. And you see the dramatic impacts of that in practically all of our societies. One thing to underline in all of this, without going too deep into the details, is that, as so often when you get a shock of this nature, it's those who are most vulnerable and those who have got least at the outset who are most dramatically impacted. We are drawing particular attention to those workers. There are 2 billion of them, 60% of the global workforce, who work in total informality, so beyond the reach of labor legislation or social protection. Of those, 1.6 billion now face the imminent risk of the destruction of their livelihoods. Their incomes already not very high, on average, have been reduced by 60% around the world. So that's the depths of the problem that we find ourselves in. Now, where do we move on from here? And this is, I think, where your dialogue is so important. I think it is, I was going to say probable, inevitable, that when we come out, if we can speak of a moment of exit from the pandemic, it will be in a world where there is much higher unemployment, much higher poverty, much higher hunger, much higher inequality, much higher levels of debt, public and private, and I think as a natural consequence, even higher levels of political and social frustration and anger. And we might think that's a pretty unpromising starting point for the things that you're going to talk about this afternoon, and so it is. But what does this pandemic situation, what instruction does it provide about this green and resilient recovery that we want to bring about? Well, the first thing to do is to say that I think that there is sometimes a temptation to say that, you know, you step out of your house today, if you're able to do so, air quality seems to be a bit better. The sky looks bluer, there's less cars going about. You might think that there are some positives in all of this from an environmental perspective. Emissions are down, or so we are told, but I read today that overall levels of atmospheric CO2 last month reached their highest levels in history. And there is something which I think we should be very, very careful about. Whilst our circumstances do demonstrate in perhaps a direct personal way the relationship between the climatic conditions and human activity, I'm afraid our current circumstances also potentially convey a negative message to the population, to public opinion, that we need to be active in correcting. You know, if what we're experiencing today is seen as what is necessary to improve natural conditions, it looks like a very bad Green Deal. This is not the Green Deal we're talking about, because people think if the natural corollary of improving environmental conditions is the economic and social cataclysm which has hit us, they're liable to draw the wrong conclusion from that experience. And of course, none of us believe that. What it demonstrates is that engineering a just transition to environmental sustainability, a carbon neutral world of work, is a very complex and difficult road to follow. And it's going to require enormous effort of policy leaders, of civil society, of business and industry, and of course, organized labor as well. This is no easy path to tread. It's a necessary one. And in this regard, clearly, and this is the subject immediately of your conversation at this point, nature-based solutions are very important. Our organization had some experience of trying to apply nature-based solutions to some of the circumstances that we address. We tend to call them local resource-based approaches. And in addition to all of the merits of these approaches, and Ángel Gurría has set them out in greater detail than I would intend to do, our experience, our direct experience shows, and it's no small consideration, that where we correctly apply this type of local resource-based approaches to some of the projects that we engage in, labor intensity can be increased by up to 35%. So there is a very important potential alignment of nature-based solutions with sustainable job creation and the improvement of economic and social conditions. Now, we need to scale that up. We do this basically here and there in specific circumstances. I think we have to scale and systematize these lessons and make them a central part of the policy agenda ahead. And my last comment, Manuel, is to say that as we face up to the multiple challenges that we face in recovering from this dramatic situation, we know that very large sums, very large volumes of resources, some $9 trillion are being invested in COVID-19 economic and social response measures. Just think about what could be achieved if that $9 trillion was consciously and explicitly made conditional upon a green component in recovery. It is a legitimate public policy issue to say to private enterprises which are in receipt of government assistance that green conditionalities have to be a part of this process. And these are, I think, the policy levers that we have to be pulling more vigorously than perhaps we've been ready to do in the past. So thanks very much for giving me the chance to make these few comments for your extraordinarily important conversation. I wish you all the very best with it. Thanks for including me.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Guy. José Ángel and Guy have brought important topics to this discussion. In case of José Ángel, he mentioned how much health can help us to unite what used to be a very fragmented agenda, and how much by working in nature-based solutions, we can do that. Also, he mentioned a big task, that it is to mainstream nature in our domestic policies. How can we do that? It is an important point. Guy, you have mentioned something really important. I think that this pandemic is showing us that there are new causes of death in the world. Informality is one of those, but also corruption. No? Those are two topics that we do need to address when we think about nature-based solutions and recovery package. And finally, you have mentioned, Guy, the importance of linking nature-based solutions with sustainable jobs, that it is strongly important. So I think that those four elements are really, really key to introduce the panel. But before of that, let me say a couple of things. The first one, it is that if we are trying to link nature-based solutions with recovery package, what we do need to make first, it is to recognize what it must be the principles of the recovery. And I think that in some way, the EU, the UN Secretary General have already mentioned some of them. In case of the EU recovery package, they have added this concept of do no harm. That I think it is important, and in our former discussion, I added do no harm and go beyond. So nature-based solutions, it is that beyond. It is to don't harm, but to move it forward. But the Secretary General, during the Earth Day, he mentioned that we do need to think in green jobs, in the transition that the IPCC has suggested to us, energy, industry, land, transport, urban, those transitions. But also he mentioned the circular economy. So those principles are key elements. And let me add one that it is related to what Guy has just mentioned. We do need to bring solutions that are labor intensive. And the point it is how much by working in nature-based solutions, we can address that labor intensive solution. We do need to create solutions that are related to a long-term vision, to a net zero carbon economy, to a resilient economy, solutions that can address what the challenge that we are facing now, that it is a nature loss among some others. But to do that, also what we do need to recognize, and this is my last point to introduce the panel, it is that at least until now, fortunately or unfortunately, because it is an evolving concept, nature-based solutions could mean everything or nothing. Because the only thing that we do have in hand, it is a broader concept. IUCN is strongly working in developing, and probably in some days they are planning to release what they call standards, that are really criteria with indicators, and by the adoption of some means of verification, that in my point of view, it is an accurate way to move this forward, and probably a governance body. So we do need to be more clear on exactly what does it mean nature-based solution. Because something it is clear to me, not every intervention to nature, it is a nature-based solution. Because what we do need to have clarity, it is that by nature-based solutions, we are addressing a clear and well-documented societal challenge. What is that societal challenge? It could be health, it could be food, it could be climate, it could be water security, among some others. So those are key elements. So with this frame, let me introduce the fantastic panel that we have for today. We have four panelists. We have Karin Kemper from the World Bank, Carlos Manuel Rodríguez, Minister of the Environment of Costa Rica, and incoming, and congratulations, Carlos Manuel, new CEO of the Global Environment Facility, Kobie from ICLEI, and Rodolfo Lacy from OECD. I will describe better each one of them one by one as I am moving this forward. So Karin, let me start with you. The World Bank can attribute to be the origin of the nature-based solutions concept. I think that it was in the World Bank that for the first time ever that concept was created around 20 years ago. And for sure now the World Bank has a strong responsibility to help to bring nature-based solutions as a key element for the recovery package. So my point to you, Karin, it is, what are you doing, or what the MDBs are doing to secure that nature-based solutions be part of the recovery package? How can we secure not only to have nature-based solutions well embedded in the recovery package, but also a best-in-class nature-based solution as part of that recovery. So, Karin, could you explore more about that question?
Thank you, Manuel, and also thanks for inviting me to this really essential discussion today. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone who's participating in this event. In the context of the crisis that we are currently living with, COVID-19, we of course have both the immediate health crisis and we have the economic crisis that we've just heard about and very eloquently described. And so for the World Bank, we very much recognize that this is a great challenge. And we have committed to financing some $160 billion in grants and financial support over the coming 15-month period. And we have already, through our, I would say, unprecedented speed in the past few months, we already have emergency operations in over 100 countries, and that covers pretty much 70% of the global population. So we are taking this very seriously. Now, as you can imagine, the very first round of financial support was for countries to address the health issue immediately. The purchase of personal protective equipment, ramping up the health sector, hospitals, and that type of thing. However, as we look at the next phase of the COVID crisis, there is already a number of countries that have asked us to focus on the recovery and also to look at a more equitable and sustainable impact on the country's natural capital and how they can invest in a greener recovery. And that is where we are doing a number of things, and as do other MDBs also, as your question was, what can MDBs do in this regard? And we have a number of investments with countries where we are already looking at landscapes approaches, coastal recovery approaches, forestry and afforestation projects. That is the type of thing where we can have a double impact at this moment, because we are able to use established channels of projects that already focus on nature, that already focus on nature-based solutions, and at the same time we can channel funds through these established channels to communities that are really hard hit by the economic crisis that they are living right now. And what that means is that then that funding has medium and long-term sustainable effects. That is a very first step in the recovery. Now, it also means that we can finance a lot of labor-intensive work. I can give you an example in the project we financed with the government of Nigeria, which is focused on the big erosion issues that Nigeria has, and that is gobbling up the arable land in Nigeria. We have restructured the project so that the funding goes to those communities that are particularly hard hit and that are particularly poor, yet it is the recovery of the land from erosion and looking at the long-term sustainability of that. The other thing that we all can do is look at a One Health approach, where we look at both human health and the linkage to environmental health and the linkage to animals and encroachments into habitats. That is becoming a very important issue, and we see that a number of decision makers have that much higher on their agenda than what they had before the COVID-19 crisis. And that, of course, links very much into the global biodiversity loss discussion, and is an important angle to take, and we can support that too. The other thing that we all can do, and that we will support is related to tourism, because when tourism, which is now of course extremely affected, when it tries to recover, maybe there will be a premium by tourists to come to more wider areas, not as crowded, not necessarily mass tourism. And that, you would assume, would help countries that want to look at stronger ecosystems and at more sustainability of their natural asset base with regard to tourism. That was perhaps not one of the key driving forces everywhere. I was on a very interesting panel yesterday around tourism, and one of the ministers on that panel said, well, tourism, when we do it right, it is sustainable. It will give us income forever. And that is exactly the idea of sustainability. And for that, you have to have your natural capital managed well, so you can go on forever and you cannot deplete it. And so maybe the last point, beyond projectized interventions that can be financed and that help countries immediately, there's also the entire policy dimension that was touched on earlier. There are countries already that we are supporting that are looking at changing their policies in a more green recovery mode. They're looking at further modernizing, for instance, their forest laws. They are looking at agricultural subsidies and how to avoid that they lead to more land use change, or that land use change gets rewarded. Countries are looking at emissions trading systems, and so that is something where we get the more systemic change at a country level, and which will then lead to much more investment in nature. One very quick last point: I liked your framing that nature-based solutions could be anything, because there's right now no exact definition. And I would like to pick that up and would say it is really about investment in nature and how we do that. And that is the nature-based solution, far away from just seeing it as a replacement of gray infrastructure. It is actually much, much bigger than that. I leave it at that. Thank you.
No, thank you, Karin. And let me make a complementary question. Bert de Bell is asking about putting monetary value to nature, how much that could help to introduce nature-based solutions as part of the recovery package. But let me complement that with some specific questions. So we do know that our main obligation as a world, it is to have real carbon reduction measures. So how can we avoid to have nature-based solutions just as a way to backslide our own obligation as a planet, or as a greenwashing? Because for many people, the big risk of nature-based solutions, it could be that one, a greenwashing. And how can we secure a best-in-class nature-based solution? So the quality of the intervention. We are part, Karin, of this evaluation council of the green bonds, which role it is to secure the outputs on the investment of that bond in sense of biodiversity and climate. So how much we can use that kind of example to secure that best-in-class nature-based solutions intervention. But please, in a couple of minutes, I know that there are many questions involved on this, but please go ahead.
Thanks, Manuel. Well, I know that has been raised by a number of people who think that, well, that this might be seen as a panacea and then one can stop doing all the other things. But I haven't actually seen that from a policy side. If one looks, for instance, at the European Green Deal, it certainly is an entire package of continued investment in renewable energies, in more sustainable transport, and in that type of shift, while at the same time looking at more investment in nature, investment in biodiversity. And that is also what I see elsewhere. I haven't seen decision makers trying to substitute. And so I'm hoping that that assessment is right. Maybe I will be proven wrong, but I see more of an overall package.
Thank you, Karin. So now let me move to Carlos Manuel. And again, Carlos Manuel, congratulations. You are currently the Minister of the Environment. I think that you are in your third time as Minister, what it is good, but your incoming position, it is as CEO of the Global Environment Facility. Congratulations for that. It is good to have somebody that has learned the difficulties to access to those funds to be now in charge of that organization. I am sure that you are going to bring a different approach. And you are from a beautiful country, Costa Rica, that it is a nature-based reality. No? So my point, Carlos Manuel, is what kind of bottlenecks we can face in relation to consider nature-based solutions a key element of the recovery package around the world. So what can we do to unlock those kind of bottlenecks or difficulties that we can face? And again, how can we secure quality of nature-based solutions interventions to secure green jobs? No, how labor-intensive it could be a nature-based solution, as for example for Costa Rica, that it is a country with a beautiful nature coverage. So please, Carlos Manuel.
Thank you, Manuel, and thank you all. Thanks everybody for the best wishes. 3 points here. One is nature-based solution is everything for us, but nothing to the rest of the planet. And the same thing I can say with the GEF. The GEF is our greatest, most successful facility to mobilize resources, but it's totally unknown to the rest of the planet. So there's one very intrinsic point on what I just mentioned. We will never, ever achieve the effort in greening up the economic recovery plans in the context of the economic recession if we don't recognize what I just said. I said in a very humble manner, by the way, but very straightforward, nevertheless. Otherwise, the big threat will be that those major recovery stimulus plan will concentrate on the very short-term actions, because there's a big pressure for our governments to come up with short, quick, magical solutions to the social and economic problem that we're heading. And I think that there may be, a good space for that to happen, but we need to be able, if we're talking about, nature-based solutions, if we're talking about, our CBD aspirations, if we're talking about the 1.5, we need to really understand that those economic recovery plans should have, yes, of course, short-term goals, objectives, targets, and outputs, but at the same time, we need to be able to bring the mid-term objectives, because after this pandemic, we will have the economic recession, and then the economic recession plus the pandemic will generate social unrest everywhere in the world. And then we will be confronted by two big things that are coming right around the corner, the biodiversity loss crisis and the climate change. And I suppose these two crises are very different than the one that we're dealing today, because we have a pandemic and we're aiming for a peak. And after we get the peak, things kind of settle down. There is no peak in the biodiversity crisis. There is no peak in the climate crisis. There is a point of no return. So this is the moment where we need to be able to bring the data, the information, particularly where you were mentioning about the cost-benefit relationship in investing in nature. So that's my second point. My third point, we need to mobilize resources for nature conservation like never before. And resources are abundant. We should be mobilizing around $140 billion annually to achieve the CBD targets, or protecting nature. We're only mobilizing around $82 billion. $140 billion may sound like a lot of money, but it is just 0.008% of global GDP. So we need to see that context. If we are going to position nature-based solutions in our facilities in the context of global GDP, we need to be able to really understand where we are. So we invest $82 billion from all sources, particularly public expenditures. What every single country is investing in nature conservation is the big chunk of that. It's $82 billion. So we had a kind of a very clear gap, $82 billion toward the $150, $140 billion that can be easily mobilized in the next 5 to 10 years if we understand how do we mobilize resources in a politically viable process, because it's not just putting pressure to industrialized countries to mobilize more resources or putting pressure to the multilateral agencies to mobilize resources. There's a lot that can be done at the domestic level. And if you see the numbers, and you know, I'm not making these numbers. I basically read what the OECD present to us. They did a comprehensive overview of all biodiversity finance very recently, and the numbers are there, very clear numbers. So I think, and the other thing is that it's not just narrowing that gap from $82 billion to $150 billion, or finding the resources or mobilizing the resources. It's also doing something OECD is telling us for a long time. We need to really phase out those negative investment that we do, humans, you know, society, economic sector do. OECD tell us that there are around $500 billion invested in potentially harmful to biodiversity activities. So we need to really approach both in the same way, mobilizing resources from all sources and be able to really phase out those negative incentives. This means that the capital markets and banks must shift towards green finance very soon, very, very soon. We can never do the leap forward in terms of scale if the capital markets and banks does not move towards green finance. And green finance is not a small problem within a bank. This means putting sustainability within the DNA of the rationale, of the business rationale of these institutions. And I think that those couple of things are. So once more, I would like to finalize, Manuel, by saying that lack of resources is not an excuse. Lack of science and technology is not an excuse. There is political will. We need to really reassess and be able to really understand the short-term political process, decision-making processes within the stimulus and recovery plans, because this is where we should be aiming, so we can really put nature-based solutions in our global environmental targets within the midterm objectives of those recovery plans. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlos Manuel. And let me ask to you something that is going to be probably a bit difficult politically, because you are an active person in relation to the Biodiversity Convention. And the CBD is discussing the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. But there are three main realities. The first one is that in some way we are going to fail in achieving the Aichi targets. So by the end of the biodiversity decade, probably we won't achieve what we had expected it should be. The second one is that we have almost 600 people, so thank you to you all in participants. And probably everybody knows what exactly does it mean NDCs, that it is a climate plan. But I am wondering how many knows exactly what does it mean the NBSAPs, no, that National Biodiversity Services Action Plans, no? Probably almost nobody, it's terrible, no? But the third one, it is the CBD, Carlos Manuel, until now, and this is for me extremely weird, is reluctant to recognize nature-based solutions as a useful concept for them. So in my point of view, it is too conservative. They are keeping the idea of ecosystem-based approach. The SAFTA has not recognized nature-based solutions as a concept. And for me, it would be extremely weird to have climate doing things in relation to nature-based solutions, and the biodiversity that it could be who get more benefits is reluctant to adopt the concept. So how can we switch that? And also I have a question from Uwe Fritze, that it is also asking to you, Carlos Manuel, how can we ensure nature-based solutions strengthen local land rights and positive social equity impact? So the relation of nature-based solution with human rights in some way. Very short, please.
So we have failed not only achieving progress in the Aichi targets, we have failed achieving progress in 99% of our international environmental agreements. That's a fact. I really don't put that much attention on terminologies at this point because at the end of the day, we're talking the same thing. You know, what CBD is aiming and nature-based solutions is aiming. That is why when Costa Rica had the opportunity to organize UNFCCC pre-COP 25 in Costa Rica, nature-based solution was one of our main objectives to be addressed. And I think that the outcome of that pre-COP and what happened in the COP in terms of side events and many other events is very satisfactory to me because we were able to narrow down the gap, the conceptual gap within CBD and UNFCCC based on this. The nature-based solution is 30% of the climate solution. We can transform the energy sector, the transportation sector, that if we don't stop deforestation, we don't consolidate protected areas, if we don't give rights to the people, farmers and indigenous communities, we will never, ever achieve the 1.5, never, ever. So the task is to really balance up the investment from the climate perspective. So I see a very positive overlap within what CBD does or aims to do in this post-2020 framework and what our NDCs are telling us or what we commit in our NDCs. And going to the second question, Manuel, definitely yes. If we don't guarantee rights, and I'm not talking just land rights, which is a key issue. I'm talking about all different rights to genetic and biochemical resources. I'm talking about carbon rights. If we don't recognize and develop frameworks that fully recognize that, we will never achieve any progress in terms of one very specific issue is land use change and deforestation. To me, it is, and I say this as Minister of Costa Rica, definitely, it is inconceivable that governments haven't been able to recognize those traditional and basic rights to the people, which will guarantee a stronger stewardship of their resources. And I think that that is in the center of what we should be discussing in the multilateral environmental agreement, definitely.
Thank you very much, Carlos Manuel. And let me use some of your words to move toward Kobie Brand. Thank you, Kobie, for joining us. And you are with ICLEI. You are Global Director for Biodiversity and Nature-Based Solutions with ICLEI. And Carlos Manuel mentioned something important, how much unknown this nature-based solution concept it is for the world, how much unknown that NBSAPs are for the world. And probably if we talk generally or broadly about nature-based solution, the people immediately will think about rural areas and not too much about urban areas. So based in this reality, Kobie, how can we first link more strongly nature-based solutions into the urban areas? And how can we make those actions being intensive in labor or that can bring solutions in labor intensive or can bring a sustainable future for the world in this time in which we are working in our recovery package. So Kobie, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Manuel. And I'm delighted to be here. And let me just also say very quickly to Carlos Manuel, congratulations on your recent appointment. We're certainly looking forward to working with you in your new role. So yes, for us, we as ICLEI, we're a network of cities and other local and subnational governments. So we breathe, eat and sleep and dream cities. And as we are celebrating today that it is time for nature, we must also remember that it is the time of cities. Our world is urbanizing and already more than half of humanity are living in cities. Most of you, I would venture, probably all of you are sitting in either a small town or a large city. And cities in a way could be described as a perfect nexus because this is where things come together. Cities are known to be incubators of change. They can fast track crack solutions. We've got our academics there, we've got our political leaders there, we've got our citizenry, our businesses run and operate from there, industries there. So it's a combination, the youth, women, it's a combination of a large sector of society that all come together and live in close proximity with each other. And this means things get innovated, things happen, and they happen at a fast pace. And there's no stopping the door, closing the door for a mayor during a time of a pandemic or any other crisis that comes his or her way. Their doors have to be open because it's there where people come knocking when they do not have water, when they run out of services, etc. So it is at the local level, really, where any global, you were talking about the new global biodiversity framework, which will be adopted next year at COP15 in China. Even that global framework is going to have to land at the local level. So there isn't a global agreement, whether it's the SDGs, the climate agreements, the biodiversity agreements, that aren't going to have to basically be implemented at the local level. So cities fundamentally are part of shaping the world we want to be and the world that people and planet both deserve. And in this instance, I think in the opening remarks today, we heard nature doesn't need us as much as we need nature. So we need nature more than nature needing us. And that's very important, and it's very true also in cities. So what we're working towards in cities, and we see this green movement happening in cities over the last 15 years, it's just been building up such momentum, is that people are demanding to be reconnected to nature. They want their parks. They want to know the products that they buy. Where do they come from? They want ethical consumerism, circular economies. These type of things are taking shape in our cities today. And nature-based solutions are very much at the heart of all these discussions and this growing green movement in cities. So it's basically something that is demanded, and it's not only measured in financial terms. We've heard a lot about big numbers already, so let me not go there again. It's also about the value that nature provides in everyday life of every human being. We are inherently part of nature, so inherently, especially if we are now locked up, some of us in our houses, and deprived of even being able to get outdoors in some instances, we really understand again how deeply we miss nature, how deeply we really want to connect and get out for a walk in a park, just be there with nature. So that deep reconnect with nature across societies in urban populations is absolutely vital, and we see a growing movement towards that. It's interesting during these weeks of the pandemic really hitting hard across the world, how many cities are really turning to initiatives like Cities with Nature. Many cities are joining programs and initiatives where they can connect with each other and see what each other is doing, how they are integrating health and nature and well-being. So we know that there are very, very direct linkages between nature and addressing nature and biodiversity in a city, and climate change, addressing climate change. We've seen statistics, and we've seen many data analysis, etc., about the contribution that, for instance, massive tree planting can do to alleviate climate change and bring about relief in inner city heat island effects, etc. But it's also true for security of food and supply of water, access to basic services, access to energy, etc. That all lies in nature. Nature is the fundamental bedrock on which every single economy of every single city should and actually is depending on. And those cities that are going to be at the forefront, those cities that are going to be successful, are the ones that are going to do it with nature, mainstreaming nature in urban planning, mainstreaming nature in development policies, and mainstreaming nature in every single aspect of service provision, infrastructure, linking business to the solutions, etc. And my final point I'd like to make is about access to resources. We've heard big numbers, but what we see in reality is that very often these funds are not accessible to, and they do not flow to the local level where they are most needed and where they could be implemented best within local contexts. So there's still a lot of work to do in the international finance space to create mechanisms, and the GEF Cities program is one such fantastic initiative which focuses on bringing finances and resources right down to the local level. So let me end there as initial remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kobie. And you know that I am reminding this very old phrase, think globally, act locally. No, I think that it has like 30 years old. I don't remember. No, but when we try to move that phrase into a developing country, I am Latin American, and I am from Lima. Lima, it is a huge city, 10 million people. Mexico City, it is more than 20. No, in case of Lima, without precipitation, so it's very dry. No, and with lack of access to water and many limitations. So how can we? So it is not just about parks. It is, for example, access to water. You have mentioned access to water. So how can we address that lack of water access when we think about nature-based solutions? Because the reality of the world, it is strongly different. I remember it was 2 years ago in a COP. I was moderator with two strong panelists, the mayor of Oslo and the mayor of Monrovia, Liberia. And I remember listening the mayor of Oslo talking about electric vehicles, energy efficiency, and buildings, and then the mayor of Monrovia, Liberia, talking about VIH, Ebola, tuberculosis, and storms, and those kind of things. And that is the reality of the world. So I would like to listen more about that developing countries, that huge cities with lack of resources, with lack of water access. How can we use nature-based solutions to sort those kind of limitations and obstacles? But please, very, very short.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm from Cape Town, so we've also experienced recently one of the worst droughts ever recorded in our country, and specifically in my city. And I think one of the key things here is that we still undervalue the nature, the gifts of nature. We take them for granted. We take them as free. So we do not pay and we do not cost them with all the costs needed to be involved. So we do not value them economically the way we should be valuing them. And then secondly, one cannot look at a city like Lima or Cape Town in isolation from its surroundings. So one's got to look at a landscape-based approach and look at regional catchment protection of ecosystem services. We talked about tipping points, so one must make sure that one doesn't reach those tipping points by looking after the catchments in the hinterlands, which actually serve the population in cities. And it should not be at the cost of the hinterland and the economies of that hinterland itself. But certainly, I think water, as we're mentioning water now, water can be completely reimagined and must be completely reimagined for large parts of our world. If we look at climate predictions of drought, etc., we've got to think about reusing water. We've got to think about sanitation and wastewater, and see the opportunities in wastewater and in the reusing of water and in valuing these resources much more. And that also comes back to circular economy, etc. One's got to actually plow back what one takes from nature in a sustainable way, so that one can build economies that can outlast the crises, the cumulative crises of both climate, energy, health, and biodiversity.
Thank you very much, Kobie. So now let me move to Rodolfo. Rodolfo, nice to have you here to join this important. We are partners in this endeavor of this Friday series. So you are from OECD, you are director of the environment of OECD, but you used to be the Mexican negotiator of the climate change for many, many years. The first time we met, it was in that condition when you played that role. So OECD is an organization which main role it is to promote best practices. So you are working best practices in integrity, environment, among some others. So how much OECD, with 38 members until now, I think so, no? How much, Costa Rica, congratulations, you are the last country who has just joined the OECD. So how much OECD can strengthen nature-based solutions as a best practice? How can you help countries to embed nature-based solutions and to mainstream nature-based solutions in their domestic policies? So and how can we avoid greenwashing? So what are those conditions to recognize a nature-based solution as a good practice or a best practice and not necessarily a greenwashing thing, no? So could you develop more of those ideas, Rodolfo?
Oh, yes, indeed. Thank you very much, Manuel, for this introduction. Yes, the OECD is working mainly with policymakers, and that's the main question for policymakers: how to address this dramatic, massive biodiversity loss, especially during this crisis. So today, as we are celebrating the World Environment Day, and the selected theme is biodiversity, the question is more than relevant. As mentioned by the Secretary General, safeguarding biodiversity is urgent and fundamental for our well-being and prosperity, for sure. After this COVID crisis, we have to save the planet. We would like to create a new and more sustainable normal. The population is asking for that. Also, a just new normal. You can see the people in the streets at this moment, despite the crisis, the danger of being infected. The people are in the streets because the development is not as just as we are envisioning in our country. So biodiversity and natural infrastructure such as forests, coral reefs, wetlands, or mangroves ecosystems are essential inputs for many economic activities and are central to hundreds of millions of livelihoods. So it is important to take into consideration that natural ecosystems are also the pillars of resilience, the resilience we have as individuals, but also the resilience of our cities, the nations. You know, as Kobie said, yet most of this natural capital is undervalued in the economy, and valued only as a harvestable commodity and not for the vital ecosystem services provided. The unpriced natural capital consumed by primary production and some primary processing sectors was valued, let me see, $73 trillion in 2013. So as the Secretary said, also, we are talking about trillions of dollars, but in scientific papers, in research papers, are not in the national accounts, are not embedded in the economy itself. In order to change the situation that we are living in our environment ministries, in order to really compare the benefits and co-benefits of investing on biodiversity, we have to measure the value of that biodiversity that we are losing. Sometimes we don't know what is exactly that biodiversity that we are losing. But despite the introduction of some policies to value biodiversity, in particular through payments for ecosystem services, Costa Rica was the first in doing that. Most existing approaches to measure and value natural capital loss remain limited, very limited. You know that at the OECD, we have this new platform that we call it Environment at a Glance. And we are gathering information from all OECD countries and many others, especially the new economies. And we are not receiving information about the value of their assets, natural assets. So it is important to improve that. Today also the OECD is celebrating the World Environment Day, launching a new document, a new policy response document, and we will call it Build Back Better. The complete title of the document is Building Back Better, a Sustainable Resilient Recovery After COVID-19. I recommend you, because we are talking there about the key dimensions of building back better. And in order to do that, we have to integrate climate and biodiversity concerns in the COVID recovery, in the post-COVID phases that our governments are, of course, expecting, and they are launching also short-term stimulus packages, and they are thinking in recovery plans, some of them green recovery plans, and that's good. But we have to keep the long-term vision in this particular measures that policymakers are taking, and nature-based solutions have to be part of that problem. If we don't do that, of course, we are creating problems for future generations that will be shouldering the burden of dealing with future crises linked to climate uncertainties and a shortage of natural resources. So governments should increase private financial flows to natural-based solutions, for example, through favorable conditions for financial support in recovery packages to organic agriculture, bioproducts. That's for example, one of the streams of investments that we created, especially in my country, with the Global Environment Facility. It is quite relevant to thinking. Let me think in the next set of biodiversity targets in the Biodiversity Convention. If we think in the ultimate indicator of biodiversity good practice, we have to have biological corridors, and we have to increase the connectivity of our ecosystems that are fragmented by the urban development, by the gray infrastructure that we created. So safeguarding and boosting natural-based solutions can reduce the vulnerability of communities to pandemics also. So, and at the same time, strengthening, as you were saying, Manuel, resilience to other types of risks, especially climate-related risks. So the solutions that we are proposing are quite precise. I can list it later if you want it. Are mainly, of course, linked to these new economic realities that the crisis is creating. What are the sectors that we must support in order to create this new normality in our societies? Well, those sectors must be low carbon and resilient productive activities, creating a circular economy in our countries, aligning the targets with the net zero greenhouse gas emissions that we have in the Paris Agreement, reducing the massive biodiversity loss, and of course, using innovative behavioral policies to change the attitude of the people against the things that are happening, of course, and that are harmful to the environment. So we are looking for the well-being of the people, the inclusiveness of the policies, and that's the main goal of the OECD for the moment. Thank you, Manuel.
Thank you, Rodolfo. And before coming back with one more question, I know that Carlos Manuel has an event with the Costa Rican president. I know that everybody's with a really packed agenda because it is World Environment Day. So thank you, Carlos Manuel, and feel free to leave this discussion whenever you want. And thank you for all your contribution. And to the participants, we will run this event just for 6-7 more minutes, no? Because we want to respect the time of everybody. So I am coming back with a question to Rodolfo, and then to a last question to all of our panelists. So thank you, Carlos Manuel. So Rodolfo, you have mentioned two important things: to keep the long-term vision and the behavioral change. But look, when we think about climate and nature, in climate looks that it is easier because we have the 1.5 threshold. We can model, we can measure in carbon emissions what should we do, but there are no equivalent for nature. No, and when I think, for example, in the 2050 vision of the CBD that is living in harmony with nature, sounds fantastic, but how to measure that? No, so it is not a net zero carbon economy that as it is in climate when we think about nature. So in my point of view, what we are suffering it is of a lack of a target that can incentivize a behavioral change. And on the other hand, based in the experience on climate that developed from a long time ago, what it is called the Global Commission on Climate and the Economy, for me, a fantastic decision, that it is creating this narrative. We don't have the same. We don't have a Global Commission for Nature and the Economy that, in my point of view, it should be something that it must be done soon, because we do need to build that narrative, and probably that is also for Karin, for all the panelists. So how can we build that narrative to promote and incentivize a behavioral change and to address a long-term vision for nature, that it is more than an idealistic target, that it could be something that that can make us able to measure progress. That is my point. Very short, Rodolfo, if you can. You are on mute, Rodolfo.
Sorry, I was trying to avoid the noises from the neighbor.
No problem.
I have a kid as a neighbor that is very active. But that's why the OECD is working very hard in this front of finance on biodiversity, the economic and business case for action. Why? Because it is true, we don't have a clear framework with indicators, targets that can be achievable, but also that can create this behavioral change that we are looking for. I think that the zero draft that we received from the CBD is trying to address that challenge, talking about or including the concept of benefits and co-benefits in all the environment domains. So for the first time, we are seeing in the UN 3 different conventions an overlapping of agendas. And it's the only way, in my opinion, to really solve the problem that you are describing. We are always thinking in silos, no? The climate community, the biodiversity constituency, no? The ocean enterprises or the businesses. So this is only one planet, it's only one ocean. It's nature that is suffering because our productive sectors are not communicating themselves, trying to reach a harmonic development and recreating the equilibrium that we know that exists in the planet or in nature as a concept, as a general concept. So what is important for us is to define, and we are helping our countries to define the new set of indicators. We have to have new metrics linked to the metrics that we are using previously in the CBD, but also in other conventions. And it's not easy because we will not have for biodiversity a single indicator as in climate we have CO2. Now we are talking at the OECD as beyond CO2, as beyond GDP, no? Because CO2 became the universal indicator for everything. And it is not true. You saw it in this COVID-19 crisis. Pollution is more related with the pandemic than CO2, of course. The particle matter in the air is quite relevant. The fragmentation of ecosystems, the way we creating relationships with wildlife is also important, especially in cities or around the cities. So we need to create this new normal, considering biodiversity. We say mainstreaming biodiversity, but it's also a very abstract concept. So we have to have clear indicators, a new metrics for the convention. I'm sure that we will be defining that in the next COP as soon as China defined the convention defined the dates. No?
Thank you, Rodolfo, and thank you for you all, the panelists. And unfortunately, we won't have time to go through some questions that are more related, and thank you to Wendelin van der Veld, that are asking many things around the financial mechanism. So Wendelin is asking, what is the scale for financial viability of nation-based solutions intervention projects? Mostly to you, Karin. If you can say it in 30 seconds, that would be great. But remember that our next Friday series of this high-level dialogue, it will be the next Friday, the 12th, and it's going to be exactly around that topic, how to unleash financial mechanism to greening the recovery. And we are going to talk about financial mechanisms as, for example, the Coalition of Ministers of Finance. As you know, the Coalition of Ministers of Finance that signed the Helsinki, adopted the Helsinki Principle and launched the Santiago Action Plan are 52, around 50 ex-countries. No, and we can insist with them, no, to achieve what they have defined. It would be their targets in relation to climate, to secure a green recovery. So, to close, in one phrase, probably Karin, you can go through that question in one phrase, but what it should be in one phrase, our immediate next step to secure nation-based solutions be part of the recovery package. So in the same order, probably first you, Karin, then Kobie, then Rodolfo.
So for the financing, very briefly, we need to get from the understanding of the economics of why nature is important. Like, for instance, the great report by the OECD showed last year. We need to get to that to make it into a financeable type of analysis. And for that, we also need to look at how to do blended finance. We know that there are very few immediately bankable projects out there where you can get investors who would immediately finance them. You get it more on the green side than on the blue side. And so to come with blended finance and de-risking instruments in order to make that happen is extremely important. And there is still a way to go. And there's a number of entities that can work with that. And governments can put it in their recovery packages, and MDBs can support with financing for de-risking to make it a bit cheaper and provide that incentive. Let me leave it there, and I'll tune in to your dialogue next week. I'm very interested in that topic.
You are more than welcome, and all our participants. So, Kobie, one phrase, what it should be our next step, immediate step, key to
absolutely
to achieve what we are expecting.
I will keep it very brief. For me, it's very clear that we need to embrace multi-level governance mechanisms immediately and recognize and enable all levels of government to work together, and then also adopt alongside that whole of society approaches where we can bring business and the civil society together with government to build these solutions. And starting at the city level is going to be our fastest way to move things up. And then finally, I would just like to say that we do need to commit and report on the progress that we make in cities. However difficult it is to find indicators, maybe where one can move towards process indicators, but one has to actually have measurable targets that you're working towards. And this is also one of the things that we'd like to see coming out of the new global biodiversity framework. Thank you.
Thank you, Kobie. And finally, Rodolfo.
Well, I must insist that governments have to screen all elements of the stimulus packages, recovery plans for their longer term implications, especially when we talk about environment, biodiversity implications. We have to build pipelines of shovel-ready sustainable infrastructure projects because there is a lack of projects in the system, in the financial system. And I remember one phrase that I hear in some of these Zoom gatherings that we are having very frequently in our virtual lives. That is, we don't want more green transactions. What we have to have are green institutions, green organizations that always think in nature-based solutions. That's the main objective.
Thank you, Rodolfo. So to finish, and I will recognize the copyright. So what I will ask to you, it is something that I heard in my former webinar very early in the morning today, organized by Climate Solutions. So to you, the three, from 1 to 10, how optimistic or pessimistic you are. 10, it is very optimistic. 1, it is pessimist. How much do you think nature-based solutions, it could be embedded in the recovery package? So first to you, Karin, 1 to 10, just a number.
8.
Good, thank you. Kobie?
It can be, and I see indications.
Karin, I will up you and say 9 and say it is essential. It should be 10.
Hey, wow, thank you, Kobie. And Rodolfo?
I am like the COVID crisis. I'm going to say 10 because we are working on that.
Wow, that is fantastic. So thank you very much to you all, to the participants. We won't have time to make a wrap up, but just to remind you that we will have our next Friday series on June the 12th to talk about unleashing financial mechanisms to greening the recovery. So let me thank you, and I am talking on behalf of OECD and WWF for joining us in this important webinar. And happy World Environment Day for you all. It is time for nature. That is the motto. Repeat it, share it in your community, because it is important to recognize that it is true. It's time for nature. So take care, keep safe, and thank you to you all panelists, participants for joining us. See you soon. Bye-bye.